Welcome to MMA Fancast. My name's Luke, and I am joined by the two-time defending CFFC light heavyweight amateur champion of the world, Luke Fernandez. Luke, welcome to the show.
How are we doing? Thanks for having me.
It is incredible. One Luke to another. This has to be a good interview at this point. Such an honor to have you on the show. CFFC is a big-time name. Huge, probably one of the top feeders to UFC or Bellator. They're on UFC Fight Pass. It's a big deal. You fought for your belt in only your fourth amateur fight. In 2 years of fighting, under 2 years of fighting, you're 6-0. You fought for a title 3 times, 2 defenses, 5 finishes, 4 of those finishes in under 2 minutes. When I was doing my research, I was like, oh my goodness, you are so impressive in what you have going for you. You're ranked number 1 out of 114 fighters by Tapology in Northeast. But before we get into some of those bigger things about your career and your style, let's just talk about your most recent fight. You fought August 26th for a CFFC card. You were defending your belt for the second time, like I said. You fought a guy who, even after your loss, is ranked number 1 on Tapology out of almost 300 amateur light heavyweight fighters down in the southeast section of Pennsylvania. So even after losing to you, he's still ranked number 1. I say that because he was 8-1 when you fought him. Really tough opponent, well-known guy, Rivas Davis Jr. Let's just talk about that fight. And if you could, pre-fight, you're 5-0 at the time. You're already the 2-time champ. What was your preparation like coming in against a guy who has more experience than you at amateur, which is hard to do when you're 5-0? So let's just talk about prep and your mindset coming into that Rivas Davis Jr. fight a little over a week and a half ago.
Because at first I wasn't even supposed to fight him. It was another opponent. He was late after the first opponent pulled out. He got put in. And it wasn't like a lot of thought going into it when the opponents were changed. I agreed to it. Me and my coach looked at it. I was up for the challenge at the end of the day. Like, I need a good test before making the jump or making the progression to going pro. So I really wanted to have that test. And an 8-1 opponent, I mean, you can't get much more experience than that. And he's done it with talented guys, beat a few guys titles, beat a few undefeated guys. So I really wanted to test my skill set and go in there against a guy that really seems to have it all put together. And also he's southpaw, so like going from before that I was fighting a orthodox fighter, then going to a southpaw, so another little challenge in the fight camp. But realistically, nothing really changed in the sense of my preparation, other than like normal things like fighting setups and stuff like that. Those change, but like mindset and preparation, work still stays the same, business as usual. And mindset going in is always the same thing. I think wrestling really helped me with like my mindset of big stages and stuff like that. And now that I've had a few fights and I've fought for a title already and defended it once, I kind of understand how the pre-fight and everything goes at this point, especially because I've fought with the CFFC a few times already. So they're very good with making everyone in that promotion and all the fighters feel like they're in the biggest of stages. Mm-hmm. So already, and it was just one of those things where if I go in there, listen to my coaches, implement my game plan, I'll come out with the same outcome. And that's kind of just how it worked out. So very fortunate to have a great fight camp, no injuries and stuff like that. Little bings and bangs, but everyone has those. So yeah.
Well, that is really the championship mindset, particularly at the amateur level. Like you said, you've already had experience. CFFC does big cards, really huge attendance. They're on UFC Fight Pass. They're even doing Fury Grappling Pro Series where they're having Clay Carpenter, Guida, and other known guys from the UFC. So they're obviously doing big things. For you, though, you mentioned something that I think is really smart, and that is, as an amateur, as an undefeated amateur, as a guy that's already well-ranked, a lot of attention, already a defending champ, you want to fight guys who are impressive, who themselves are impressive. You're not really going to test yourself. You're not going to necessarily get a lot of people excited about you if you're just if you're not going at guys that are impressive themselves. That's why I quoted that your opponent is still right now on Tapology ranked 1 out of 284, almost 300 fighters. He's still considered the best of, because his loss to you, he's still considered the best out of almost 300 fighters. And that shows the quality of him. Like you said, he's such an experienced guy. I always kind of like to think that you guys could re-meet at your pro level at some point, because he's that quality of a guy. And that's what you want to see. You want to see opponents who could make it at the next level, just like yourself. You train at Dante Rivera, BJJ, out of New Jersey. He's a UFC vet. You mentioned your training camp. What has been working in your training camp as far as mindset goes? You wrestled at Elizabethtown College, which in my mind, I think is a D3 school. Okay, correct. I used to coach track and field at Waynesburg College, which we're in the same big Eastern Athletic Conference, the ECAC, I believe. So I'm pretty sure it was D3. So talk a little bit about D3 wrestling. I think it's still wrestling. It's still tough. Clearly it's division, and I've coached athletes at this division. So, its division is not the same recruitment that you get at a D2 or D1. So what was it like wrestling at Elizabethtown, and how did that transition you into MMA after probably a couple years out of college?
So like going into college, in high school, I didn't really wrestle. Like I started wrestling late, and then it wasn't until like my senior year where I realized like I really started to excel and I really loved the sport. So by my senior year, that's when I really like felt that I wanted to do nothing but go to school to wrestle. So then once I got into a program and I met the coaches at E-Town, I really loved it. And then it was just it's a different mentality from high school to high school to college. Obviously, when you get in a college room, it's everyone there is now the best of the best in their high school room, So I came from being the big fish in my pond, and I came there and I got humbled real quick. And it was like day in, day out, I was training with guys that were like top 3 in the country and stuff. I had a guy that was a All-American that was my drill partner in my whole freshman year. I went without scoring a point on him. So that whole year I really learned what it was like to like get humbled and just like persevere and push through like hard days. And I think that really transitioned my wrestling into higher level wrestling, where like no matter what, it still stay the course, stay focused on your goals, and just like grab your lunch pail and go to work. And I think that's what changed my mind as a whole in like life as because of college wrestling. It really made me understand that like nothing comes easy in that sense. Like you got to work for this. You could be athletic, you could be gifted in this and that, but if you don't work, like you will get exposed in certain things. And I think once I decided to pursue MMA, it was that same feeling where like went in, got to get humbled, and it just stay the course. Because then things, if you continue to chip away at that goal, you're going to start to see things fall into line. You're going to start to see yourself progress in different aspects of your game. And I think wrestling really just gave me that base where I came in and I can start to excel in like jiu-jitsu and cage wrestling and stuff like that. Because I understood pressure. I understood good positioning when my hips are in bad position. Like what's good and bad. Even though I didn't know certain techniques, I knew that I could use that platform of wrestling and that base I had to really excel. And that's why I really love the sport, because there's so much different facets and different things that go into MMA. And I feel like sharpening each tool as you go in a fight camp and even in your time off is really exciting and just something I love to do. So it all came from my experience as a D3 wrestler. Even though people say like, D3 is D3 and it's not D1. I know guys that could excel in like D1 rooms if they just had that opportunity. Like some guys started late, some guys just never had that, they didn't have that high school career. They started to excel later in their college career, but at the end of the day, it's still wrestling, and it's 2 guys that are getting on the mat and really getting after it. So that's what really helped me get into this mindset of, as we said, I coach wrestling. I was coaching high school wrestling for a few years. And one of the mottos that we used from the head coach that actually fought in CFFC too. We were both coaching and we both fought for CFFC, which was just a small world, but he's implemented this thing low and forward. And that's just how I view a lot of things now. Like rocky times in like life come, like there's always hills and valleys, but like if you just stay low and forward, like in your stance, it's just, you'll always get to where you want to be eventually.
I I appreciate you going deep into that mindset question. I think there's obviously something beautiful about the scholarship athletes at D1 and D2. Having been a D3 athlete and coach, similar to you, I think the one mental aspect that might be slightly better at D3, and obviously we're D3 guys, so we're a bit of homers here. But one thing I'll say is at 5:30 a.m. practices or whatever the worst practice you have, you don't have the motivation of being on scholarship. You're not on contract. There's no penalty if you stop coming. I'm sure you've been, sounds like E-Town had quite the heavy duty wrestling team where there was a lot of motivation, but it's nothing as a coach at Division III to have an early morning bus ride, like as a track coach, and somebody just not get on the bus because they don't have to. There's no punishment if they don't. So I do think there's a mindset that transitions well to MMA, because in MMA, no matter how athletic or talented you are, you mentioned this, particularly when you're coming in new to kickboxing or BJJ, there's going to be days where you're on the losing end. Things are tough. You're not picking it up right away. And I think the mindset of you had to choose for an entire year, your freshman year, we did not score a point in training. What was it like 3 months in to that, towards the end of that first year? How was it capable for you to see the bigger picture of it as development versus the sort of the small picture of that there was no real tangible progress at that time? Talk a little bit about that, maybe a couple months in, more than halfway through your first year at E-Town where you hadn't scored on your training partner.
I mean, after calling my mom and dad every night, the first few weeks and months, damn, this isn't for me. I don't think I'm there, this and that. Just going in my first time being away from home, all this stuff. So nothing's really going my way. And I'm not used to that because in my room in high school, I was, the hardest work I did well. And I was the big fish in that pond. So once I was in this, and like you said, 3 months in, at that point, my only goal is to get a little closer. So maybe get in on my takedowns, get deep in my takedowns, maybe at least threaten a finish. And then by the end of the year, I'm looking for a finish. It's just little things. And like I said, that was my one drill partner, and he was the one guy that was the biggest fish in that pond. It just happened to be my drill partner. So I wasn't scoring on him, but I made sure if I went with other guys, that's where I was catching my wins. It just happened to be that I was usually training with him all the time, but when we went into groups, I made sure I was attacking those other guys to get my wins. Because it's like, if you're an athlete in that sense, you're starving for victories, and anywhere I can get those wins. Next thing, when we're going to the lunch line, I'm trying to beat my friends and starving for a win that day, So it's just the little things, like you said, you got to see the bigger picture, and it might not be you getting your hand raised in practice because you're going with an absolute stud that just has way more experience than me. He was a fifth-year senior at that time, just came off of a All-American year. I just didn't have the tool belt to beat him, so I just had to focus on the little things, and that's really what helped me that year. Because then the next year when he graduated, I matured a little bit more, and I started to see those gains and stuff. I really realized that I needed that. I needed to go through that. And I think it was the best thing for me because it really made you realize like you said, what's your motivation for this? What do you really want to do? Do you really want this, or do you just want to be part of the team? Or I think it was the best thing for me.
I can hear that from what you said. I've been a counselor, and a coach, particularly at the college level. And I think wrestling through that, okay, wrestling, you were a wrestler, but struggling through the reason behind something, I think I always say as a mental health counselor now, it's the why behind the what. The what is you're on the team, but why are you on the team? Because that why gets really challenged when it's not smooth. I personally, as a coach, particularly at the D3 level, I like when the first year is a little bit challenging of a test for an athlete, because if it's too easy, particularly at the Division III level, there's nothing to hold somebody to coming back out the next year. And I've had athletes that were so good their first year that either they got the opportunity to move up to a higher level, which is great, or they kind of lost the fire because it was too easy. So learning what you did and getting your encouragement from your parents. Obviously, we're all human. We get down. This is a quick shout out for mental health counseling, particularly for athletes who are so identified by their performance. I think that's a dangerous mindset to get in. You want to excel, you want to need it, you want to drive, but We all know people that slid into depression and suicidal thought because of an ACL tear or something else that stopped their career. So I'm just doing a quick shout out for the mental health. Get the mental health. If you're a college student, you're an athlete, high school, go see the staff that's on your campus. Most colleges, I'm sure E-Town even have counselors that kind of pick up the athletes that know what they're doing with the athletes. So that's just a shout out. I'm also glad you used your parents. Now to get back to the winning ways, we talked about kind of the rocky start at E-Town. Let's break down from your perspective. If you could walk us through, you ended up getting the finish against this tough Rivas Davis Jr. in the second round in just under 2 minutes in the second round. For people that don't know, this was a three-minute round fight, advanced amateur rules in Pennsylvania. And so you're talking about a total of just under 5 minutes of fighting. So walk us through the first 3 minutes in round one from your perspective, what was going on in the corner, and kind of build us up to the finish, which ended up being by strikes. Tapology doesn't tell me if that was standing strikes, ground strikes, or what have you. So if you could walk us through first round, and then we'll go from there.
First round came out. We both were exchanging on our feet, and I knew that he had a very good straight left. He's a lefty, and I know that his left hand's hard, and he throws it straight and hard. But he was kind of loading up on that, and that's kind of what we picked up on, like seeing his film and stuff, that he's really going to load up on that left. And I was fortunate enough to have a few. Actually, one of my main sparring partners is a lefty, so I get that look. But we exchanged our feet a little bit, and I think that I landed a few good right hands, and he landed, I think, a little in an exchange. He landed a hook or two or stuff like that, but it was just kind of like an even exchange on our feet. But my main game plan coming in was, I think that my cardio is going to be one of my biggest tools in any fight. I always think that my cardio is going to be one of the biggest tools. So once we were exchanging, I was like, I could force this to the ground with just some wrestling off of these strikes. And I realized that, like, when I'm throwing punches, he's only focused on hands. So I just disappeared under a punch, got into a double, took him down. And then once I feel, I'm comfortable being on top and stuff like that with wrestling, just controlling my hips and striking. And that's kind of like where I feel the most comfortable in a fight, just because you could dictate where you go and just kind of float and follow. It's kind of like exactly what you do in wrestling. So the fight went to the ground. I landed a lot of strikes on the ground, forced it. He ended up getting back to his feet. On the way up, I landed a few more clean punches. Then actually off one of my punches, because I landed a hard right in the first opening, like the first minute of the fight, which kind of, looking back, I wish I didn't land such overhand right at first, because then I got like gun happy on my overhand right, which if I like set more up and let combinations roll, I think I would have a little bit cleaner striking. But off of one of my later overhand rights I threw, he ducked under and got in on my legs. I kind of just hipped in, got him up, and I ended up dropping him with a knee to the solar plex, and then I got on top. And I thought that it was actually going to get called first round, because I was landing a lot of unanswered strikes. At the end of it, I had double boots in. He was face down, covering both of his ears. I was landing a lot of strikes on the ground, but it didn't get stopped. I went for a rear naked choke in like the last 5-10 seconds, didn't get it. Going to the corner, the only thing I was not nervous about, but we're like in the last 30 seconds, I didn't want to punch myself out, because I could see that the wasn't stopping it, and he was kind of just protecting his side, so he was face down. So I kind of just like coasted through the last 20 seconds, throwing hard strikes, but making sure that I like saved some energy, because I knew that it was going to go to a second round at that point, because he wasn't calling it. So going to the corner, my coach just calmed me down, like continued to press our game plan, which is keep the pressure on. You're going to get this finished if you keep doing what you're doing. If he stands if we stay on our feet, you know what to do with your hands. Let your right hand go and just be cautious of his straight left. He's going to load up on it, and if you want to, take it to the ground, which is what ended up happening. I did a little bit of movement right off the opening seconds of the round. Did a little movement, landed a jab and then overhand right, but then went right into my double, put him against the cage, big lift, took him down, then went right back to my ground and pound. And by the end of it, I landed a lot of clean strikes on the ground, and he actually like kicked off of me. And once I stood up, that's he didn't try to get up. He kind of just covered his face. The ref ended up coming in. So it was a kind of an awkward stoppage, but I mean, I didn't blame the ref for stopping it. I think that he could have stopped it earlier. I think there was a few times where there's a lot of unanswered strikes for no reason, I think, at that point, especially at the amateur level. But it was I was glad that it went at least that long where I could feel, because he's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and I was able to feel like a brown belt's level of trying to like sweep and roll and move underneath, and I just tried to keep my positioning, which ended up working out in my favor. So I think it was overall a pretty decent performance. I gave myself like I'll give myself a B- or a C+ on the day, just because I wish my hands could have been a little bit cleaner, and that's something that I always critique myself on. But I'll take a C+, B-.
Well, I appreciate you going in depth and really walking us through that fight. A few things from my perspective to point out is you're aware, and this is really important for people that might wonder why you would give yourself a C+ or a B- on what a lot of people would see as a very dominant fight is you get better through finding things to improve. You don't get better if you say, oh, that's an A+ fight, I'm coasting. You'll never improve. So I really respect that about you. Also, there's a phrase that you probably, maybe even your coach said, particularly athletes and fighters become victims to their own success. You mentioned that with your overhand. And I think it's very humble and very open for growth. The mindset you had, champ, where you said, I kind of wish I didn't hit that overhand in the first 20, 30 seconds and get confident, feel good about it, because it led to kind of a more power wide striking as opposed to crisp, clean flow. So I think for people that might not understand that you're looking at what you need to do at the next level, the pro level. And then there's kind of like I always say, there's the first 5 fights you have at pro, then there's the next 5 fights you have. And then usually by the time people are in double digits of pro, that's when the calls to the big things. I mean, Stipe Miocic obviously was 7-0. We went to the UFC. If you're undefeated at the pro level, usually 6 to 8 gets you noticed, and maybe 9-2, or something like that gets you noticed, or 8-1, something like that. So for people that don't know, you're looking incredible at amateur. Your next 5 fights at pro is going to be important, and the next 5 is kind of what gets you to the next level. First 5 is sort of what establishes you. Next 5, so that's stuff down the road. So the fact that you're picking apart your performance is super important. You also mentioned that it felt good to kind of feel what the hips of a brown belt would do. And for people that may not know, particularly if you're in jiu-jitsu, when the coach allows you, try to roll with people better, obviously, because whatever traps they're using, whatever technique they're using, you may be blown away by it, but it'll at least get you the feel of some of the things that happen. So always important for that. Another thing that you broke down, which I really, really like, is when did you start thinking during your fight? I don't mean overanalyzing, you need the flow, but you mentioned at the end, about 30 seconds ago, at the end of the round 1, you kind of thought, okay, this ref isn't stopping it. I need to shift into power but conserve mode. What number of your fight, because I would assume the first couple you were just go mode, but what number of because there's adrenaline, what number of your amateur fights did you start kind of feeling yourself be able to analyze as you were fighting?
I would say after like my second fight, I started to feel that and be able to like think about it more in my hard rounds of sparring and fight camp, where I knew I was doing. Whenever I'm in fight camps, we do hard 5-minute rounds during our fight camps. There's no break. You get 30 seconds of the next guy coming in, but it's a fresh guy every round. And there's sometimes where, I'm not saying I'm coasting in those, but at least in certain situations, I know that I'm still going to have another round no matter what if I get the submission or something like that. And there's just certain spots where you don't want to like tire out, like force a squeeze when you know you don't have it, kind of readjust and make sure that you're using the right technique rather than using strength. There's no reason to be on the cage trying to lift a guy and force something where it's all strength. Find the proper technique and focus on that, and kind of not conserve yourself for like take it easy through the rounds, but conserve yourself in a smart way to be able to have the highest level of performance through those fives. Because either way, you're going to be dead tired. You're going to have fresh guys on you every time. There's no avoiding it.
You're not going to feel good after 25 minutes regardless. Yeah.
No. Just one of those trying to keep your technique crisp while using that gas tank to your advantage. So, I mean, that's where I kind of felt that's like my second fight. That was, I think, my most eye-opening fight where I did get touched a few times that fight. I did get dropped once, but I just stayed on. It was a little flash knockdown, but it was one of those things that makes you feel like you realize that this is a fight game. Are you in it or not? And in that moment, I said, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in this. So let's continue to implement my game plan. And I feel like that was the best thing for my early career, is to feel that 3-minute war. I mean, that 3-round war, and get a unanimous decision out of it. But yeah, I think that's when that started, being able to analyze, like during a fight, like just being able to be conscious of where you're at in a fight and what's the best avenue of success, and focusing on techniques through, I would say, after my second fight.
Well, I appreciate that insight. Your second fight, for people that may not know, is your only decision win, but you learn from that. That's a kind of a long amount, a large amount of cage time early in your career, which is good. And then, like I had said earlier, 4 of your 5 finishes came under 2 minutes in the round. And while those are exciting, one of them was under 30 seconds. You need some of that experience of increasing. If you could, you mentioned knowing where you were on the ground. He was covered, and I don't understand why the ref didn't stop it, because that's like the least defendable location. And most of the time, I think you're a 3 to 4 max, 1, 2, 3. The ref should probably be coming in, unless he's hipping out or trying to build his base or something. But we're not here to argue with the ref. We've seen fighters. Parharis once lost the fight to Nate the Great Marquardt because he started arguing with the ref that Nate had greased his legs, which he hadn't. He had just sweated a lot before because he was known for his leg locks. It's the weirdest ending you'll ever see. Don't know if you've seen it at 185, but at the time they were both a big deal. And he slides off Nate Marquardt's legs because Nate was sweating because he was trying to go for a heel hook, looks up to the ref, starts arguing like, hey, I think he put grease on his legs, and Nate knocks him out. So, which is what you should do. So it's always important to stay focused on the fight game. But you talk about drills. You just mentioned 5-minute rounds. I know a lot of fighters for ground and pound, because it's a tough thing to practice against a live person. You can a little bit, but a lot of them practice on heavy bags or body bags on the ground. And I've done drills. I've had fighters do drills where they don't know how many rounds they're going to have to do on the body bag, but they're transitioning, they're punching, they're elbowing, they're doing posture up, posture down, spin control. How much of those type of drills do you think is not only important for you, but that you would recommend for somebody coming up, so that they realize that it's important to kind of put yourself in real life positions? It's odd to punch chest down, one arm, and then switch. You get in funky positions. So talk a little bit about how important it is to practice maybe real world situations like body bags on the ground.
I think any type of drilling like that, where you can get a real test for your cardio in certain positions, because I mean, cardio is not measurable, really. I believe it's not measurable. It's something that just needs to be pushed in different scenarios, because you could be in the best shape to stand up and go 20 minutes of punching on your like strikes on your feet, but once that gets taken down, now you're in a different world. Next thing you know, you feel like drowning. And at any situation where you could implement drilling to push that cardio in those specific positions is super important. One thing that my coach really stresses is we do a lot of ground and pound rounds where it's like the bigger small gloves, like 8-ounce, 9-ounce gloves, jiu-jitsu, but you're looking to get in positions to land the best ground and pound strikes. You're trying to get to a dominant position where you can find that TKO position or something like that. And we are throwing strikes and stuff like that. And I think those type of drills, those live goes where we're going 5 minutes on the ground, and we'll do 8 rounds in a row. So it's basically a lot of jiu-jitsu, but you are doing ground and pound. So you have to be wary of positions. You can't just sit on your back and look for submissions, because you will be catching punches in the face. It's one of those things that those drills, I think, are really important to understand where you're vulnerable and where you're in a good position, where you're in a bad position. So I think that's really what it comes down to, is being comfortable in all those positions and then being able to push your gas tank in those positions. So I think drilling and live goes in those situations is the best way to push that cardio, and it's super important.
That's also important. You mentioned your coaches. That's also important to understand that I always say this: coaching is its own sport, meaning there's strategy, there's techniques, there's obviously what works, but every coach is going to have a different emphasis. And clearly that one What you just described there is actually now its own sport called combat BJJ, where it's all BJJ, but with full strikes to the face. And it's obviously really changing what BJJ is. I would think maybe it's MMA guys that are trying to work on BJJ, or maybe it's guys that are more BJJ but don't want to have to learn the full striking of knees and stand up. So I think combat BJJ is super interesting. For the pure BJJ gi wearer, they'll probably get frustrated very quickly because you can't really hold a spider guard or an X guard or some of these more complicated things, because yeah, they can work if you can hold a pant leg and they're great, but it doesn't work if the guy's punching in the face. So I think the fact that your gym has kind of instituted that combat BJJ for rounds, it teaches the mindset that put yourself in a position for submission. I'm a bit of a nerd, and I looked over your Tapology. You've had 3 submissions, all different types of submissions: Americana and Anaconda, and a rear naked choke. From what you just described, I can see why you've had such variety in your submissions. For people that don't know, a lot of amateur fighters, they submit maybe 1 type, maybe 2 types, because they just always look for that type. How early in your BJJ did you kind of fall in love with the idea of variety in your submission game?
I kind of was forced to fall in love with the variety because my coach Dante Rivera is very keen on jiu-jitsu. He believes that that's the base of having a great MMA tool belt, and I agree. If you can learn submissions, I mean, I'm in the gi every day for the most part. Once you can understand gi jiu-jitsu and just different positions where you can sweep or find different submissions, once you implement that, you can strike before that to open up things and pass and stuff like that. It really makes it, I think, easier to find submissions, because like you said, in jiu-jitsu, like you could sit and wait in certain positions, but if you're getting punched in the face, you're forced to move. So it's one of those things where we always practice that strikes, posturing and strikes to the face and to the body open up different movements. And my coach is very keen on understanding that guys are going to move certain ways, and that's going to open different submissions and different avenues to find like success on the ground. So he's very, very keen on that. And I think that's something that's really helped my game as a wrestler coming in, is that I understand positioning and I understand how to stay in a good dominant position. But once I understood the jiu-jitsu part of it, it just kind of meshed, and it really helped my jiu-jitsu game as a whole, because now I could almost bait people into turning, into giving me an arm or finding a sweep or a pass and stuff like that. And I think that's the most important thing on the ground, because when 90% of fights are going to the ground, if one guy gets touched or the other guy gets touched, guys are usually shooting. So you got to have that ground game. If you're just a striker, you're going to fall into some issues once you go to the ground. So I always been working on the ground, and my coach is very keen on working on the ground in jiu-jitsu. So I'm fortunate for that.
Well, for the ladies and gentlemen of the audience, it's a real treat, I hope, for people that are listening to you to recognize that you are the reason you're coaching, but really the mindset that, yes, you can be a great athlete. And obviously fighters are great athletes, and you can have aggression. Like you said, you got to be able to take a punch, get sat down and be like, I'm in a fight. But I think what separates the next level as you gain your skills is the ability to do a deep dive like you just did. The ability to be able to break down not only what your coaches are telling you, Dante Rivera was in the UFC, very skilled guy, but the rationale for why, understanding it. There's a joke with Bill Belichick that, and it's a real video from a couple years ago. Somebody asked him about some long snapper from like 5 years ago, and he went for a half hour on some long snapper from 5 years ago, because that's what Bill Belichick does. He understands and is breaking down film on a second string long snapper. And that's what I was kind of getting from your answer. It was so detailed and so good in understanding. You got an Americana win, sometimes called a key lock. And I would sometimes teach that from the cross body position, reaching across to set that up. You can either finish it that way, or the person, your opponent, will sometimes reach over, setting up the armbar, the falling back armbar. And I'm sure you learn that connection, because most people, if their arm's getting bent back this way, they're going to reach across to block it. I mean, that's sort of one of the things. And so you mentioned wrestling. Wrestling forbids certain finishes. you lock up what would be the Kimura, but you can't finish it, right? There's certain things that you can kind of put in place, but can't fully finish. For
Yeah.
you coming from wrestling, what was it like your first 6 months in BJJ, even if you were on the losing end, but realizing, oh, wow, you can actually go until somebody taps, you can actually go until the other person says stop, which in wrestling doesn't happen. There's obviously getting, that's the finish, getting the pin, but the other person actually hasn't submitted. So what was it like mentally being able to lock up some of the submissions that in wrestling you couldn't have? What was it also like knowing that nobody's stopping it except your opponent?
It was definitely a learning experience through that. Wrestling definitely like helped me have a base in it where I could get away with certain things, and I understood when I was in bad positions. But once you get that freedom of like setting something up and catching stuff, I think that jiu-jitsu in that way is more like there's more of like a winning feeling when you really set up a submission, you walk through every step to get it. Where wrestling, a lot of times, like your aggression and your ability to react, like your reaction time and your skill like that can get you a takedown because you just drilled it in your head 1,000 times and it went off a feel, like you don't even feel it. But jiu-jitsu is more of like a puzzle game, a chess match where step A leads to step B and step C, and then once you get to step D, you're submitting. So I think that transition of slow down and understand where you're at position wise and take it step by step was the biggest like learning curve for me, because in wrestling, like I said, it's just go, go, go. So once I got to the ability where now I can put submissions in, and it's all on the opponent now to make that match stop, or that round stop. It was just, I feel like the floodgates kind of opened on. There's so much more things I could learn and like put in my game. I didn't want to be a one trick pony, because I think that it's so cool to see a guy in jiu-jitsu throwing some really cool, like it looks like really crazy looking move, but realistically, if you learn the technique, it's not that hard as long as you get from step A to step B to step C. And that's what I realized with jiu-jitsu. So that's the thing I'm falling in love with jiu-jitsu, is trying to find more submissions so I could not be that like wrestler that just does head and arm chokes or forces rear naked and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's just been the biggest thing with me, is just trying to learn as many different techniques and transitions in jiu-jitsu as I can.
Well, on that point, waiting for this interview, I was watching Dana White Contender Series tonight, and I think it was the featured bout of 185ers. I forget their names, but it was this cool exchange. It ended up finishing with a Von Preux choke. That's Von Flue mixed with Ovince St. Preux. I love putting the Von Preux in there because Ovince St. Preux has 4 Von Flue or Von Preux chokes in the UFC, and Von Flue only had 2. So I love to combine that. But anyhow, here's what was interesting. DC was on the commentary team. The guy on the bottom had a pretty good lock on the guillotine because it was a takedown attempt. But as soon as they landed on the ground, I was noticing, even when DC was talking about, oh, the guy on the ground needs to regain the guard to get the squeeze, but he never locked it up. So the opponent who ended up winning got to crossbody, and immediately started putting on the Von Preux. And the 3 commentators missed it until the guy on the bottom was tapping, because there's a disease sometimes in BJJ, and I'm sure you've caught it early and hopefully you eradicated it, which is once you go on the offensive in BJJ, which is important, you have to remember to be defensive. And so for anybody out there who's holding on to guillotines, once your opponent is not in full guard and they are in crossbody, you need to actually get defensive. You need to free your arm. You need to base out. You need to brace. You need to get and hopefully turn towards and shrimp and do all this stuff to regain. But at the pro level of, I don't know what their records were, but good on Dana White Contender Series, obviously that's a mental loss that hopefully he gets back and recovers. This isn't me dinging anybody, but it gets to what you were saying about the complexity of BJJ. That even as commentators, even DC, I'm sure he knows what a Von Preux choke is, but the excitement of, oh, the guy on the bottom, all he has to do is regain guard. And I'm like, but the guy on the top is clearly going for a Von Flue. Nobody mentioned it until it was tapped. And I think that's what's exciting about BJJ is you can be on the defense and offense at the exact same time. And what somebody else's setup, the guy was shooting, the other guy set up a guillotine. His setup became his downfall. That's got to be magical as far as BJJ.
Yeah. As a wrestler, I learned quick in jiu-jitsu. When you shoot, you have to watch out for guillotines. So actually, that's funny because I use the bomb flute all the time. Like, it's one of my favorite go-tos. If a guy locks up a guillotine while I'm finishing my double, I'm clearing legs.
Yeah.
So when I land, I'm inside control, and then I just catch that hand. And once you catch that hand, especially if there's gloves on, it's not coming out.
Yeah.
Then you control the pressure. But one thing that wrestling's helped me with in jiu-jitsu is we always teach it, like, you can't chase a bad position in wrestling. Once you give up your 2 points, the points are there. You can't get them back by recovering. Like, they already are on the scoreboard, so it's over. You have to know when it's too late. You have to punt. We always say, like, punt.
Yeah.
Like, know that you're on the defense now and regain in a good position rather than chasing a bad position and then giving up more points. So that mindset I transitioned with into jiu-jitsu is certain things. Like, if I'm not on the offensive end anymore, I have to be mindful of my defense while I'm in there and realize that I could put myself in a bad position if I keep chasing. So just staying in that mindset of don't chase a bad position and know when to punt into your defense, which turns into, like you said, offense. It all weaves. So just because you give up one situation or one position doesn't mean that it's over, as long as you either recover or string together another submission or something like that. So yeah, I mean, as a wrestler, I love the Von Flue choke. And I think that it being used in the UFC is so cool because it's one of those things that, like you said, most people won't see it until, why's that guy tapping? He's on the bottom, like he has the choke, but realistically he doesn't.
Yeah, and that's a really good insight. It also shows that unique situations come up all the time, and being able to, like you said, being able to flow from the unique positions. I'm not making fun of any particularly high level pro that gets a good guillotine and is focused on holding on to that. But like you said, there's a very small window when the person gets to the side where you got to get into defense and get the arm heck out of the way, or else it's trapped and you're in trouble. So it's being able to know how to flow. Well, we've talked about your wrestling, your transition MMA, your incredible MMA run, your 6-0. You broke down round by round, minute by minute of your Rivas Davis Jr. fight. Tons of insight. So now we have to get to kind of the next point. And you mentioned, so I'm bringing it up because you mentioned it, that one of the reasons why you said yes to a Rivas Davis Jr. fight is because he's obviously very high ranked. They flew him in. He's a big deal. And you want to fight big deals before you go pro. Now, clearly that's a decision for you and your team and your coaches. But where are you at publicly as far as talking about is pro right now? Do you defend your belt for CFFC light heavyweight amateur title for the third time because you just defended it for the second time? Kind of what's next? If you're comfortable sharing about it, it's only been 10 days. So if you're not, we can always have you back on later. I'd love to talk to you about before your next fight. But you brought up pro, so I figured I'd just open the door now.
So I mean, I think it's safe to say that we're definitely in the realm of we're now going pro. So my next fight, I will 90% sure that I'm going pro. I believe that's the point of action at this point. And timing wise, I'm not sure. There might be a date on the horizon. I might have a loose date, maybe looking like December, not too sure, but that's where we're at right now. Just now we're building the tool belt. We're going to focus on getting back to work. I've been back in the gym this week. I actually just sparred tonight and stuff. So I'm back to the drawing board. I'm trying to get better, focused on now the pro level. My amateur career is behind me. I love the progression that I've seen, but I'm definitely not where I want to be yet. So I want to grow and continue to grow and push myself to make a statement at my first pro fight. And I'm excited for that. So as of now, yes, the next fight's pro and a loose date, possibly December, not too sure, but excited for wherever it goes.
Well, I'm excited for you and your camp. And I already have a bunch of questions breaking down technique in training from the amateur rules you mentioned earlier. We won't ask them tonight because that'll be when you're back on for going pro. Congratulations, of course, making that decision. This is the time to go pro. If some people missed it, Luke actually mentioned earlier about bringing your opponent up, kneeing him in the solar plexus. You had mentioned that earlier. Some people might have missed why. Of course, it sucks to get kneed in the solar plexus. It's a great spot to knee, but it's because you can't legally knee to the face or elbow to the face, and you're allowed ground and pound, but not elbows, just closed fist strikes is what it's called. So there's a lot of restrictions that your brain, no head kicks. There's a lot of restrictions that your brain is calculating constantly in a advanced amateur rule set. So I'm excited. The next time we have you back on, I'm going to talk to you a lot about how have you been kind of training the more pro rule set, because you've been having to train sort of those limitations that your brain didn't think head kick when there was an opening, because that would have gotten you DQ'd. So it's going to be fun to have you on in a few months to talk about sort of what's training been like to train in the pro rules. Can't wait for it. If you have any sponsors or people you need to thank, let's get them now, because it's been an absolute honor talking to you. I love how detailed you are. I can't wait to pick your brain in a couple months about the nuances of training for pro.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you having me on. Sponsors wise, and I just want to thank my team, Dante Rivera. We got I think the best team on the East Coast. We're all kind of leveling up together, and I'm just excited to jump into those pro ranks and stuff like that. So, I mean, I'll give a shout out to my sponsors. I got Prime Exteriors, I got Silver Cloud Marina, I got SC Arms Gun Company. I had a lot of people around me. Dungeon Boxing, which is my dad's boxing. He's my hands coach, so I've been fortunate enough to have that in my corner. Savvy Fit Soaps is my newest sponsor. Very excited to be working with like a holistic, natural body type of like holistic. I mean, something that I could. It's the word I'm looking for. All natural products is something that I've been looking for in my own life, and it actually just worked out together. We actually live like right around the corner from each other, so it's been a very organic friendship that happened naturally. So excited to work with them. Yeah, and just that's really it. I think sponsor wise and stuff. Very excited. If I missed anyone else, I'm sorry, but very excited to go pro. Very excited to continue to build this career and just get better. I'm just looking forward to continuing to build. That's it.
Well, I'm excited for you, your mindset, your production, your performance. And even at the end there, you talking about, you need to be excited about your sponsors. They help you. And obviously a sponsor that's a body soap is a great idea, because when you're training MMA, you constantly need to be worried about getting clean. And for people that are health conscious, the chemicals we put on and in our body is crazy. You should always be looking for decreasing the amount of man-made chemicals we expose ourselves to. Completely agree. It's been an absolute honor, one Luke to another. It's been an absolute honor having you on the show. You've been listening to Luke Basin on MMA Fancast. My guest, first-time guest of hopefully many, the reigning, defending, two-time defended champ, three-time 205 amateur light heavyweight champ of the world for CFFC. It's a long title. Luke, thanks so much for being on the show, and I can't wait to have you back on when you go pro. Congratulations to you and your team.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Luke, for having me.
You got it.